Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the story of how my name disappeared. One seat, one signature, one silence at a time. At my sister's wedding, her new family gave me a folding chair by the vendor table and then laughed when I thanked the servers by name. They thought I came to watch, but I came to remind them I was never gone. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever been treated like an extra in a story you helped build? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. Because this isn't just about a wedding. It's about worth and what happens when someone finally decides to step back into the frame. They didn't even use my name. Just +1 if you're in town. That was how I got invited to my sister's wedding. The envelope lay among spools of thread and a folded yard of linen. I noticed the printing first. Typed, not handwritten like Sierra's birthday cards used to be, the ones she decorated with little flowers in the margins. This one was cream, gold-lettered, thick as if pretending to carry something important. But it didn't. It just carried a truth I already suspected. I was a formality. I sat on the edge of the work table, scissors still in hand, watching the card tilt slightly under the fan's breeze. Below my name, or lack thereof, were the details. Date, time, dress code. No, we'd love to see you, not even a scribbled XO at the bottom, just +1 if you're in town. Well, I was, and I wasn't sure they'd be thrilled about that. My phone buzzed. Mom. I debated letting it ring. Then curiosity won. Hello? Clara? She said briskly. No pleasantries. We got your RSVP, I hope. It's important you come, for appearances. For appearances, I repeated. Not family? She paused. You know how these things are. The Price family keeps track. I smiled, but not the kind you'd see. I'm sure they do. We hung up with nothing settled but my silence. I stood for a long while, looking around my studio, the chalk-streaked mirror, the thread rack, the soft hum of the espresso machine downstairs. This was my world. Quiet, earned. Miles from Belmare in more than just distance. I ran a hand over my old blazer, hung carefully by the window. It was one of the first things I'd made without anyone's help. Ivory wool, lined in soft cotton. A bit too warm for spring, but it made me feel like myself. I spotted a loose stitch inside the hem and sat down with my needle and lamp. Small, careful movements. Invisible fixes. The kind I was best at. I'll go, but I won't hide, I murmured, tying off the thread with a practiced hand. Later, I folded the invitation neatly and slid it into my worn leather bag. As I did, another envelope shifted underneath. Thinner, white, with a faint watermark from a legal office in Hartford. Still sealed, still unopened. I packed the invitation into her old leather bag. Underneath it, an unopened envelope from a lawyer's office peeks out. Belmare hadn't changed. Still white fences, swan-shaped topiaries, and people who smiled too tightly. The sun filtered through the maple trees just enough to make everything look softer than it felt. I stepped out of the rental car, clutching my leather bag, and tried not to let the weight of familiarity settle too hard on my shoulders. The Price estate loomed ahead, white columns, trimmed hedges, and a valet who didn't even look up when he opened my door. Someone mistook me for catering staff before I even crossed the front lawn. A woman in coral lace handed me an empty champagne flute and said, "Oh, can you take this, dear?" I handed it back without a word. The ceremony had already ended. Guests milled about under white canopies strung with glass lanterns, and a jazz trio played something light and unmemorable. I scanned for Sierra. There she was, radiant, polished, tucked into the curve of Colton's arm. She glanced my way, nodded slightly, then turned to greet a guest behind her. Her bridal smile didn't flicker. Elaine floated nearby, offering hugs like campaign flyers. She didn't acknowledge me. Maybe she hadn't seen me. Maybe that was the point. I stood near a table of hors d'oeuvres when a sharp voice landed behind me. "Oh, you must be the artsy sister. That's adorable." I turned. A woman with perfect hair and a pearl brooch was already sipping from her glass and looking past me. I smiled politely. Not as adorable as pretending to compliment someone while belittling them. Her lips tightened. I walked away. The lake was quieter. I followed the gravel path until the music faded behind me. The breeze smelled of cedar and champagne. A voice caught up to me. "You still walk with your shoulders tight when you're holding back." I turned to find Milo, camera slung at his side, shirt sleeves rolled, hair messier than he probably meant it to be. I blinked. "You're here." He grinned. "So are you." We stood in the silence for a moment. Then he said, "3 years ago, you gave me a place to sleep when I had nowhere. You didn't even ask why. You looked like you needed something more than questions." He nodded. "I never forgot that." We talked a few more minutes about photography, work, people who pretend they don't remember you. He seemed different now, grounded. He looked around once, then leaned closer. Milo leans in and says, "By the way, I think there's something you should see. Come find me after dinner." He handed me a flash drive and whispered, "They declared you dead, Clara." "I have the documents." I didn't answer right away. The library was too quiet, and the chandelier above us gave off a buzz like an old refrigerator. I held the tiny drive in my palm, still warm from his fingers, as if the truth might burn through the plastic. Milo didn't say anything else. He just pointed to a narrow table by the window, already cleared of cocktail glasses. I followed, sat, and opened my laptop. I could feel the music from the reception vibrating faintly through the floor. The folder on the drive was labeled Estate Files, Belmare. Inside, a scanned death certificate, filed in Vermont, dated June 2020. Cause: accidental drowning. Location: Mexico. My full name, my date of birth, even my social security number. Everything matched. I exhaled slowly. "Who signed this?" "Gerald," Milo said, pulling out his phone. "And another name I didn't recognize. Benson Crane, family accountant maybe, but it was submitted just after your grandfather died." I called Warren. The line clicked twice before he picked up. "I was hoping I'd hear from you," he said. "You got the envelope?" I looked at the unopened one in my bag. "Still sealed, but Milo has the files." Warren's voice was low and firm. "It's worse than I thought. Rufus left the lake cabin and the legacy trust to you. But the trust only activates if you're alive and independent from Bell Holdings." I swallowed hard. "So they erased me to keep it." "They filed for full transfer last year. You showing up disrupts that." "But it's delicate. We have 30 days to file reversal paperwork. After that, it's gone." Through the tall windows, I could see the lake catching bits of moonlight. It looked peaceful, but I remembered what Rufus once said while we skipped stones one summer. Stillness can mean two things: rest or danger. Most folks can't tell which until it's too late. I glanced at Milo. He was looking down, fidgeting with a camera lens cap. "You didn't have to get involved," I said. He met my eyes. "You didn't have to help me 3 years ago, but you did." The laptop fan whirred quietly. On the screen, the signature that said I was dead stared back at me like a bruise. I closed the lid. "Warren, if you want to fight this, we have a path. But you only have 30 days. They said the main table was full, but I saw the empty seat, right next to Sierra. The planner smiled with a practiced brightness and pointed me toward the far end of the reception canopy. "We've placed you with the event team and vendors. More space there and closer to the kitchen." I nodded once. It wasn't worth a scene. The long tables glowed under string lights, glasses already clinking, people in pastel linen talking with half-lowered voices. At the center, Sierra laughed delicately as Colton twirled a fork between his fingers. Elaine sat straight-backed, pearls catching the golden hour like armor. And just beside Sierra, an open chair. I saw it. We all did. At my table, a young waiter with sleeves rolled too far was adjusting silverware. A florist assistant clipped loose stems from the centerpieces. The DJ's intern was trying not to spill his soda. I folded my napkin and smiled at the girl across from me who wore sneakers under her long black pants. "I like your laces," I said. She blinked, surprised, then smiled. "They're sparkly! Keeps me awake." A few seats down, Colton's cousin recounted some story about someone with a degree in finger painting trying to open an art school. The laughter drifted. I sipped water and looked toward the lake. I didn't need an audience for my presence. One of the servers passed by, balancing a tower of plates. Just behind her, a tray of hors d'oeuvres wobbled. It clattered to the ground with a dull crash. Crackers, cheese, almonds scattered. People turned, paused, turned back. I stood and knelt beside her. "Watch your step," I said, gently sliding a piece of brie back onto the tray. She looked at me like I'd spoken a different language. "Thanks," she whispered. "Most folks just stare." I smiled again, and we finished picking up in silence. Back in my seat, my napkin was folded differently. I glanced around. Milo walked past just then, adjusting his camera strap. He didn't stop, didn't speak, but he nodded once, slow and certain. Inside the napkin was a note written in clean, slanted script. 8 p.m. Greenhouse. Come alone. Dinner continued. Toasts were made. Elaine mentioned family values more than once. Sierra looked down when my name came up. I didn't mind. Not really. When I stood to leave, the girl in sneakers leaned over and said softly, "Thanks for treating us like people." I touched her arm lightly. "That shouldn't be rare." Near the greenhouse, Milo waits. "I know who filed it," he says, "and I think I know why. They took my name off everything, except the part they couldn't erase." The rain had settled into a soft whisper against the windows, just enough to blur the view of the garden beyond. I stood in what used to be my bedroom, now lined with unopened wedding gifts and stacks of crystal wine glasses. The walls still wore the pale green I had chosen at 16, but my books were gone, my sewing form replaced by an armor stuffed with table linens. On the edge of an old dresser sat the envelope from Warren's office. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the parchment-colored paper. Inside, a notarized copy of my grandfather Rufus Bell's codicil to his will. Hand-signed. "Firm to Clara Bell," it read. "The Bellmere Lake Cabin and a Legacy Trust. Contingent on proof of life and legal independence from Bell Holdings." I pressed my palm flat on the paper. It felt heavier than it should have. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Footsteps, then Warren's voice calling my name. Milo followed close behind, his camera bag slung over one shoulder. Warren's coat was still damp. He set down a file folder and pulled off his glasses to wipe them. "This is airtight. If filed correctly, you're the rightful beneficiary. But the condition is time-sensitive. You turn 33 next month. The clock started the day Rufus died." Milo handed me a small slip of paper. "I heard Colton's father bragging about tying up the estate through technical solutions. He called it cleanup." I shook my head. They couldn't just let me be gone. They had to make it official. Warren studied me. You still have time, but not much. The door creaked behind us. Elaine stood there in a pale robe, holding a steaming cup. She looked at the folder, then at me. He always did spoil you with dreams. I didn't flinch. He gave me what you couldn't, belief. She opened her mouth, then closed it. After a moment, she turned and walked away. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still here after all these years, and pulled open the drawer of the nightstand. Folded inside was a sketch I'd forgotten I'd left. My first design. A hand-stitched blazer with curved lapels and lined cuffs. Rufus had helped me pin it to the display board the day I finished it. I'm not crashing the wedding, I said quietly. I'm reclaiming what's already mine. Warren placed the motion on the table. If you file this Monday morning, the court must freeze the assets. You'll beat the deadline. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a drink, but I made them look. The reception was already in full swing when I walked in. Music floated above the hum of conversation, and lanterns swayed gently from the canopy strung across the garden. Laughter came in little bursts, like the pop of champagne corks. I didn't look left or right. I just walked straight toward the wedding planner standing by the head table. She blinked when I handed her the envelope. This is a court injunction, Warren said beside me, voice calm. Filed this morning, effective immediately. Transfer of assets is frozen pending investigation. The planner stepped back, as if she'd touched a hot plate. A murmur rippled across the tables, forks pausing in midair. Across the lawn, Gerald's jaw tightened. Elaine's lips thinned. Colton leaned in and hissed something to a man in a navy suit. Milo stood quietly in the back, camera in hand, filming without a word. Sierra stood at the microphone, ready to give her speech. Her eyes found mine. I held her gaze. I won't take long, I said, stepping forward. I didn't reach for the mic. I didn't call attention. I just looked at my sister and said softly, You look beautiful. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. To the bride and groom, I added, raising my glass. Just water, no garnish. Then I turned, walking back down the aisle of chairs that had never held space for me. A few servers stepped aside as I passed. The girl with the sparkly laces gave me a small nod. One by one they stood. Nothing loud, nothing rehearsed, just quiet, steady acknowledgement. Outside, the night air was cooler. The lights from the tent glowed behind me, like a lantern set too far away to warm. Footsteps approached. I didn't know they filed you as dead, Sierra said, her voice catching. I thought you just left. I turned, my blazer collar pulled high against the breeze. You never asked. She didn't follow when I walked away. The moon hung low over the lake as if watching gently. My hands felt empty, but not weak. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying silence. A month later, I opened the doors to the Rufus Center, a creative shelter space for women starting over. On the wall, my grandfather's quote, Some people build walls, others build rooms with windows. Some moments don't need to be loud to be life-changing. That day at the wedding, I didn't reclaim the spotlight. I reclaimed my name, my voice, and the quiet dignity I had carried all along. When we choose compassion over comparison and presence over pride, we create space for a different kind of justice, one that doesn't shout, but still stands. Because kindness doesn't always arrive wrapped in applause. Sometimes it walks in gently, wearing a handmade blazer and holding the truth. If this story reminded you of someone who once stood alone, perhaps reach out and let them know they were never forgotten. And if it stirred something in you, feel free to leave a comment or subscribe to hear more stories where quiet strength finds its voice.